Hello everyone, Azu Sapphire here. This is Frosty, a Dell Vostro 400 that my dad bought for some family friends back in April of 2008, and it was in service for about 17 and a half years until I got it. I will display the specs on screen right now. Okay, that's for the original specs, and now here's for the upgraded specs that I put into it. Yes, that is pretty much guarantee that all Vostro 400s come with the GG33 MO3 motherboard, regardless of what CPU they shipped with from the factory. Although, despite effectively being a higher end trim of Inspiron 530, it's still not that great. I mean, yes, this is an OEM system from like the beginning of the recession era. We can see that the IO shield is a part of the case, so if you want to put a different motherboard in here, then you're going to have to cut this up and make some modifications, and even then, you might not be able to fit an IO shield in. At the very least, this does use a micro ATX form factor, not BTX, so otherwise, aside from the IO shield being a part of the case, this pretty much uses off the shelf hardware, aside from the motherboard being tailor made for Dell by Foxconn. Okay, so underneath this cooler is the Core 2 Quad Q9550 that I upgraded this with. It originally came with a Core 2 Duo E8200 as shown in the spec sheet earlier. This case fan over here is an Arctic F8. I replaced it. Well, I replaced the original 92 mil fan that was in here because the 92 mil fan that was originally in here, well, I'll just show you a picture of this thing when I got it. Without going too much into detail, this thing was not exactly kept in the healthiest environment. So it was caked in dust. This thing was nasty. And even then, it's still kind of nasty inside. This graphics card over here is an ATI FirePro V4800 that a buddy of mine gave me. Now, this wasn't my first choice of graphics card. I was originally going to put in my GTX 750. However, this computer is a little bit crap, and when I tried it in my GTX 650 even, it would work in the BIOS, but once you tried to boot into any operating system at all, like whether it was already installed or through install media or through Pixie Boot, yeah, no, the computer would just freak out and hard reset. This PCI card here is serial and parallel. I added that myself. I scrapped it from an HP Z440 workstation. Not really much reason for it to be there, but it's there. I have the card. For storage mediums, this originally had a 250 gigabyte Seagate 7200 RPM hard drive, which somehow still worked after 64,000 hours. But that hard drive was old and tired, and might as well just use these better drives that I have sitting around. So this one over here is a Pioneer 480 gigabyte SSD with the Phison S11 controller. These SSDs are cheap. They're not great. Some say they're slower than mechanical hard drives, but in my experience, they've worked fine, except for Windows Vista. Those take like 3 minutes or so to boot if you install Vista directly onto one of these SSDs and don't install it onto another drive and clone it over beforehand. But yeah, as long as we stick to any OS that isn't Windows Vista, these disks are fine. And as for this hard drive over here, it's a 1 terabyte LED Blue that I got in the swap meet lot last year. And you might be able to see that this has dual optical drives. Well, this wasn't always the case. This had a single optical drive when I got it. It was actually only a DVD-ROM. It wasn't DVD-RW, but I think the CD part of it was RW. But I had to replace it, even if it was a rather lame drive, because it didn't work. Like, I don't know how often the disk drive was used on this thing, but it just wasn't working. And the second disk drive I have just sitting around, it was spare. I took it out of a computer that I found at the literal dumpster. It works, but I always just use my old Vostro 220's optical drive. And speaking of disk drives not working, we can see that we have a floppy disk drive over here, because this has a floppy disk drive controller. As you expect, it doesn't work. And the thing is, I don't think it was ever used. Either this is a really crap floppy drive because it's such a late one from 2008, or maybe this thing was so caked in dust that it messed up the floppy drive. And I'm sure that I plugged it in all the way. Like, I plugged in the data cable. Yeah, that's in all the way. And I configured the floppy drive in the BIOS to be seeked. And yes, it makes the power-up noises. But like, for some reason, that floppy drive doesn't work. Yeah, I could source a replacement unit. I don't really feel like it. I don't really care enough. Really, I just wanted this to be my 2-in-1 Windows XP and 7 PC. But then a couple nights ago, I came to a realization when I was working on this, when I was installing device drivers on Windows 2000, even XP. You see this Ethernet port over here? Turns out for a pedestrian desktop in 2007, 2008, rather mid-range one at that, this Ethernet is only 10100 spec, not even gigabit. And like, why? Was it really that much more expensive to implement gigabits in 2008? Like, yeah, I get that this was a consumer desktop first, and this is just the small business rebadged version of it. But like, come on, guys. You couldn't have at least implemented gigabit on a desktop? At least this just manages to clear the capacitor plague era, as there aren't any bad caps over here. Although, as seen with Petabyte AG's Dell XPS 420, also from about the same time period, that had a couple blown caps as well, so oops. It's only a matter of time before the caps go on this one too. But yeah, from the GPU incompatibilities to this thing not being the best taken care of, and the 10100 Ethernet, which, by the way, I actually care about because I'm frequently connecting to my server and making transfers and doing Pixie-Boo and whatnot. So while I can accept it on something that's like Pentium 4 era, this is a Core 2 quad system. It should not be this way. Unacceptable! So yeah, the GPU issues were already enough to make me iffy on wanting to keep this around, but the 10100 Ethernet is just... that's just gross. That's just the cherry on the poop sundae. And it sucks because this is one of the few computers that my family bought brand new, or at least my dad did. He bought it for family friends. And it's survived all these years from 2008 all the way to 2025 and now 2026. And for this thing to just be so thoroughly mediocre for what I want to do with it, we could definitely do better than that. I've done better, and I'm going to do better again, so what'll the new hardware be? It's going to be Ivy Bridge era, of course. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going that new exactly. This is a box for a P8Z77VLK motherboard from Asus, but this is not what's actually in here. What's actually in here is a motherboard with the same color scheme and the same 11.5X cooler. But this is the manual that it came with. It's for a P7 P55DE Pro. And that's exactly the motherboard that's in here. P7 P55DE Pro, which means this uses the P55 chipset and is on socket LGA 1156. 1156 was always kind of a weird socket to me. Like, it was always the black sheep of early 2010s and late 2000s Intel. Like, nobody had LGA 1156. People had 775, people had 1366, everyone had 1155. Well, then again, everyone had 775 as well. And hell, even AM3 was more popular than 1156. So, like, what gives? Why was the first generation always glossed over so much? I guess that OEMs really didn't like the first generation of Intel processors because they were kind of segmented weirdly for one. But also when Sandy Bridge rolled around, Sandy Bridge was just so much better. But that doesn't mean that good old 1156 here doesn't have a place. This is one of the nicer 1156 boards, as it has USB 3.0. Now, it's not native USB 3.0. That wasn't until the 7 series of Intel chipsets. It's on an external controller. But still, the fact that we have USB 3.0 on a board from 2009-2010 is quite nice. We've also got built-in FireWire, which was starting to die out around this time, but FireWire does still have its good legacy purposes. eSATA. Ugh. Why does everyone like eSATA so much? My dad had nothing but problems with it at work. Well, I did hear that if you had a good controller and whatnot, that eSATA was actually quite good, but these days, not much point really when USB 3 is almost as fast and way more plentiful. And also it came with an I/O shield. This is actually one of the nicer I/O shields I've seen come with an Asus board. As usually when I get I/O shields with Asus boards, they're all just silver and cheap and have bendy tabs, but this one doesn't have any of that. It's got a black backing to it and this soft material. Now, why did I choose the failed socket LGA 1156, the LGA 1851 of 15 years ago, when LGA 1155 and 1366 are objectively better and still have the legacy support that I'd want? Well, first off, this motherboard along with the CPU and this cooler were only $5, and also the I/O shield. But yeah, all this, I got it locally for only $5. It was up on the marketplace for nearly 2 months. And I was like, but back then, I was like, I didn't really care, but But once I started regretting getting rid of the Gateway DX4840 that my cousin brought home with a bunch of other desktops because I wrote it off as junk and thought it was worthless, like I couldn't sell it, I was like, okay, this is still up on Marketplace. I'm going to grab it and save this for a rainy day when I'm ready to build it. Yeah, in this video, we're going to test it. I don't quite have the parts I want and need yet to make this into a proper build. But also, I have a rather silly goal with this build that I want to do, and I want all of its hardware, well, not all of its hardware, but really just the core hardware, to have been available before K-On! Season 2, Episode 21 premiered. I don't know, I'm just weird like that. But yeah, this is what I'd call the ideal 2010 PC. Yeah, it's not LGA 1366, but who cares? I certainly wouldn't have noticed or cared back then. I was only like 7 or 8. But also, when it comes to a legacy system and Intel from this period, I think LGA 1156 might actually be kind of underrated. Like, everyone targets 775, 1155, and 1366, but never 1156. And I had always questioned that even when I was younger. Like, why does everyone skip this generation? I mean, there probably was a reason for it, but like, it's always nice to take a look at the more forgotten and obscure and less remembered sockets. And while several years ago, like, I don't know, 5, 7 years ago, something like that, I would have just seen this as just Core 2 in a trench coat. At least when I've used Nehalem on laptops compared to Core 2, the Nehalem stuff holds up significantly better. I think that might be either because of the extra threads on the dual cores, or it could have been the integrated memory controller, or the higher IPC. Could have been any of that, really. But also another thing is that while this doesn't lose much legacy support from late 775, it does gain a bit of more modern support because Nehalem processors were the first ones from Intel to have SSE 4.2 and POP-C&T instructions, which are part of x86 64v2, which is required to run Windows 11 version 24H2 and later. And also, even Linux is starting to require x86 64v2, at least with Fedora and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Linux is only going to keep your Core 2s alive for as long as distros are still compiling for x86 64v1. And this is more of a personal thing, really, but whenever I have, like, Sandy Bridge and whatnot, I always feel like I'm running Windows XP 7, whatever older OS is on this, is a waste of the hardware, not doing it justice, so I would just end up installing Windows 10 anyway. Or maybe 11 LTS, but more realistically 10. And it might be entirely artificial, but I feel like that Nehalem is just old enough for me to not just wing Windows 10 on here, but also new enough to have a better modern support if I wanted it. This will be a 2-in-1 config for Windows XP and 7. And also I'd heard that once you start hitting 2011 or so, drivers for XP start becoming not quite that great compared to 2010 and earlier. I don't know how that actually is in practice, but at least with the base hardware config, we'll see how things go. Now, in order to test this, I'm going to need some parts in order to make this all function. So first off is definitely a bit of a hot topic right now. Yes, I have RAM. I'm rich. Though, if we take a look, it's only 2 gigabytes of this stuff. Well, two 2 gig sticks, so it's 4 gigabytes of this stuff. Yeah, this stuff is worthless. Or at least was worthless until the RAM crisis part of Doomsday came, and now we have buy DDR3 against slop content. So it's only a matter of time before DDR3 becomes prohibitively expensive, and thus we get nothing. But these 2 gig sticks I scrapped out of the Gateway DX4840. Yeah, I didn't care about anything from that except for the RAM and at least one other part that we're going to be testing this with as well. This is not that other part. This is the FirePro V4800 from the Dell Vostro 400. Although, if we take a look at the sticker, it has a December 2011 manufacture date, and it's a Dell sticker at that. So I'm pretty sure this came out of a later production Dell Precision T3500. This is the quickest graphics card that I have access to at the moment, so we're going to use this for testing. I wanted to test it with my GTX 650 and further test that card, but I don't know where that is at the moment, and I don't feel like digging it out in my disaster of a room at the moment. But also, we need a power supply. This is the other part scrapped from the Gateway DX4840. It is a 450 watt FSP group, 80 plus bronze, apparently manufactured for Acer, designed for Acer. I don't know if this was original or if it was scrapped from another Acer desktop, but this was in the DX4840, which was an Acer product by then. And this power supply is actually kind of nice. It has a 6-pin GPU connector and also an 8-pin GPU connector. Wouldn't try to run both at the same time, but it's good that we have those. 450 watts might not be enough for this system in its final form, but for testing it the way it is, it's going to be fine. Although this 24-pin cable is a little bit on the short side. Position this stuff a little weirdly. I'm not going to plug in any SATA devices in this video. Oh, we're going to have to position this even more weirdly then. This has a 4-pin CPU connector, and this motherboard only has an 8-pin, but that's fine. We're not overclocking just yet, especially not with this dinky little stock cooler. So we're going to have to position this a bit weirdly. I have my power cable right here, but we're still not done yet because we need to get video out. Also, because this is the most convenient thing I have access to at the moment, DVI to HDMI to mini HDMI. This is going into my portable monitor, which I'm going to plug in off screen. Okay, now we just need to plug in power. Okay, the motherboard is receiving power, as seen by this green LED. Now we need access to a power button. You know the classic trick. Just take a screwdriver and short out the power switch pins. Oh, it's positioned a little weirdly on this motherboard. It's actually towards the bottom. Come on. There we go. It's receiving power. I don't have a post speaker available for it, so we're just gonna have to take this one's word for it. Okay, I think the DRAM light went off. Oh, there's the boot screen, and this has a Core i5-760 in it. A little bit nicer of an i5 than I was expecting, but still not an i7. Luckily, i7-870s are rather cheap on eBay, so I might pick one of those up for this, just so we have 8 threads. I mean, it's not a big deal, but might as well do it anyway if I have to put money into getting like a case and another power supply and whatnot. Okay, let's 3-finger salute and get into the BIOS somehow. Yeah, delete key. I figured it was the delete key. DDR3 1333, just as I expected. Asus Easy Flash 2. I wonder what BIOS version this has on it. Not like it really matters, because like there aren't any newer CPUs for 1156, and those that are newer aren't even worth using, especially not on P55, which doesn't even have integrated graphics. SATAs 1 through 6. Even though this board has 9 SATA ports on it, weirdly enough. I think the other ones might be part of like some sort of RAID controller or external SATA 600. SATA configuration, disable compatible and enhanced. Configure SATA as IDE. Why would I do that? I might want to plop a new clock battery into this motherboard. System information, i5-760 at 2.8 gigahertz. So it's basically an i7-860 without SMT. BIOS build date, August 27th, 2010. So that would have been just after K-On! Season 2, Episode 21. This motherboard was released at the end of 2009. I don't care. Realtek LAN. Not exactly the greatest LAN in the world, but I'm 99.999999% sure it is gigabit by this point. J-Micron SATA PATA controller. So J-Micron is responsible for the additional controllers on this board. So we have J-Micron and Marvell. I think Marvell has the RAID controller. Onboard USB 3 controller enabled. Why wouldn't I enable that? LAN boot ROM, I am definitely enabling that. Hardware monitor. CPU is running at 68 degrees Celsius. Oof. We're gonna have to get a new cooler for this, or at the very least repaste the CPU. But if I'm going that far, I might as well just buy the i7-870 anyway. Removable device, hard drive, which I don't have attached at the moment, and CD-ROM. I usually like to have the CD-ROM come before the hard drive. Quick boot, full screen logo. I used to like turning off the full screen logo when I had the Asus M4A785T-M and a past timeline. This is kind of reminding me of that, actually, because it's a blue Asus board from 2010. Oh, this has Asus Express Gate. What? I'll leave that enabled for the funny. or enable it for the phony, because I don't think it was actually enabled by default. ExpressGate installation is incomplete. Yeah, go figure. Okay, PCIe GBE, so that's gigabit. Very good. I mean, I guess I could get to installing Windows XP in 7 or redo my install because I don't really want to carry all the junk from the Vostro 400 over to this. I'd rather just start over, but hey, it's good to see that this motherboard is working. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again in another one. I don't know when part 2 of this series is going to come out, but that's going to be when I get some more hardware for this. I'll see y'all in another video. Peace out.